A new Frankenstein from Guillermo del Toro is coming soon. And at the same time, The Curse of Frankenstein has just been restored and re-released. So it feels like the perfect moment to look back at every Frankenstein film Hammer Studios ever made. Their version wasn't tragic or restrained like the old Universal films. It was bold, bloody, and disturbingly human. But let's see where it all began. I didn't know this until recently, but Hammer's first Frankenstein was inspired more by their own 1952 film Four-Sided Triangle than by Universal's black and white classic. Both stories were about scientists pushing the limits, but this time things got much darker. Directed by Terence Fisher, The Curse of Frankenstein became Hammer's first real dive into Gothic horror, and their first film drenched in bold Eastman color. At one point, there were even rumors that Boris Karloff might return as the creature. Those rumors reached Universal, who quickly warned Hammer not to copy a thing, especially the famous makeup design. So producer Anthony Hines, writer Jimmy Sangster, and Fisher decided to make their own version of the story, with makeup artist Phil Leakey creating an entirely new look for the monster. Familiar, yes, but far more brutal and unsettling. Peter Cushing played Baron Victor Frankenstein, calm, intelligent, and terrifyingly cold. Christopher Lee appeared as the creature for the first and only time, a tall and scarred figure with a dead eye and no trace of sympathy. Fisher once described him as a minstrel of monstrosity, and that fits perfectly. Set in Victorian Switzerland, the film looked rich and theatrical, full of ornate sets, vivid color, and shocking violence for its time. When it premiered in London on May 2, 1957, The Curse of Frankenstein was a sensation. It didn't just launch a series, it turned Hammer Studios into a major name in horror. After the success of The Curse of Frankenstein, a sequel was inevitable, and Hammer wasted no time. The problem, of course, was that Baron Frankenstein had just been guillotined. When writer Jimmy Sangster reminded studio head James Carreras about that, Carreras reportedly laughed and said, "Oh, we'll just sew the head back on again." And that's more or less how the Revenge of Frankenstein begins, with the Baron escaping execution and starting a new life under the name Dr. Victor Stein. Now he's running a medical practice in the city of Karlsbruck, helping the rich by day and experimenting on the poor by night. Directed again by Terence Fisher and shot in bright Technicolor, the film looks even more polished than its predecessor. Peter Cushing returns with the same icy precision, but this time the story is more about manipulation and deceit than pure horror. When Frankenstein and his eager assistant Hans attempt to transplant a human brain into a healthy new body, the result isn't redemption, it's disaster. Released in the summer of 1958 on a double bill with Curse of the Demon, it performed solidly and kept the series alive. The story was later adapted into several novelizations, including one by screenwriter Jimmy Sangster under the pen name Hereford Janes. By the mid-60s, Hammer had already turned Frankenstein into its own tradition, but The Evil of Frankenstein was a little different. After The Revenge of Frankenstein, the studio took a long break before returning to the Baron, this time under a new director, Freddie Francis. The result feels unlike the earlier films. The story drops the continuity from the previous film and starts fresh. Baron Frankenstein, still played by Peter Cushing, returns to his hometown after years in hiding and discovers his original creation frozen in ice. He revives it, of course, but the brain doesn't respond, so he turns to a hypnotist named Zoltan to wake the creature's mind. It works, but not for long. Zoltan begins using the monster for his own revenge. For once, Hammer was officially working with Universal, which meant they could finally use the studio's iconic monster design. Flathead, bolts, the whole look. The creature was played by Kiwi Kingston, a New Zealand wrestler who gave it a heavy, lumbering presence. Cushing once again threw himself into the role, even doing many of his own stunts, but the film's stage-bound sets and exaggerated style made it feel like an odd fit within the series. Still, The Evil of Frankenstein has its charm, and like it or not, it's part of the story. In 1967, Hammer brought the Baron back in one of the strangest and most ambitious films of the series. The idea for it had been around since 1958, when The Revenge of Frankenstein was still in production. Around that time, Roger Vadim's And God Created Woman was a hit, and Hammer, inspired by its success, planned to follow it with And Then Frankenstein Created Woman. Directed once again by Terence Fisher, Frankenstein Created Woman shifts the focus from flesh to soul, literally. This time, Victor Frankenstein works with his new assistant Dr. Hertz to capture a human soul and place it into another body. The story follows Hans, a young man wrongfully executed for murder, and Christina, his disfigured lover, played by Susan Denberg. After Hans's death, she takes her own life, and the Baron seizes the chance to bring them back as one. He transfers Hans's soul into Christina's restored body, creating a woman who looks perfect, but carries the fury of a man unjustly killed. Yes, it may not have the spectacle of earlier entries, but Frankenstein Created Woman lingers, half ghost story, half moral experiment. It's the most controversial chapter in the entire series. Here, Victor Frankenstein, still played by Peter Cushing, has lost any trace of morality. Living under a false name, he blackmails a young doctor and his fiancée into helping him kidnap a former colleague from an asylum. Frankenstein's plan is to transplant the man's brain into a new body, not to give life, but to steal knowledge from a mind he can no longer control. The film is best known for one scene that shocked everyone, even the people who made it. The sequence in which the Baron assaults the young woman he's been blackmailing wasn't in the original script. Both Cushing and director Terence Fisher objected to filming it, but Hammer executive James Carreras insisted on adding it during a rare on-set visit. The rest of the story is dark and tragic. The transplant works, but the man who wakes up inside another body remembers everything: his past, his wife, and the horror of what's been done to him. Freddie Jones plays the role with heartbreaking intensity, and his scene with the wife, who no longer recognizes him, is one of the most memorable in any Hammer film. The Horror of Frankenstein is a reboot of Hammer's Frankenstein saga, almost a remake of The Curse of Frankenstein. It revisits the rise of Victor Frankenstein from a precocious and arrogant medical student to a sociopath willing to sacrifice anyone and anything in his quest to create life. And in its bid to look more youth-oriented, Hammer inserted 30-year-old Ralph Bates into Peter Cushing's old role. This time, the Baron is cynical and self-absorbed, spending as much time chasing women as building his creation. Jimmy Sangster, in his directorial debut, turned the story into a black comedy, confident in style, but uneven in tone. The creature was played by David Prowse, a former weightlifting champion who would later become Darth Vader. The film was independently financed in Britain, one of the first times Hammer sought UK financing without advance US backing, and at the time of production only had domestic distribution in place. It was shot on recycled sets from Taste the Blood of Dracula and The Vampire Lovers, and released as part of a double bill with Scars of Dracula. Critics were divided. Some found it light and clever, others thought it was tedious and missed the point. The seventh film in Hammer's Frankenstein series, and the sixth starring Peter Cushing, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, closes the saga. The Baron has survived the fire from Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, and now hides in an asylum, posing as its surgeon. With the help of a young admirer, Simon Helder, he resumes his experiments, using the inmates as unwilling donors for a new creation, a hulking, tragic creature once again played by David Prowse. By this point, Cushing was in frail health, but as committed as ever, even performing his own stunts, including leaping onto Prowse's back in one chaotic fight scene. He also helped design the Baron's look, though later joked that the wig made him resemble American actress Helen Hayes. Like many late Hammer productions, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell was made on a small budget, its sets and effects scaled down compared to the grander entries of the 1960s. But what it lacked in scope, it made up for in atmosphere. It was also the final film directed by Terence Fisher, a key architect of Hammer's Gothic style since The Curse of Frankenstein. But critics were divided. Some praised its mood and Cushing's performance. Others found it slow and grim. At the box office, the film performed poorly, marking not just the end of the Frankenstein cycle, but the twilight of Hammer's golden era. And before we wrap up, let's return once more to 1958. That same year, Hammer teamed up with Columbia Pictures to produce an American TV series called Tales of Frankenstein. It was meant to follow the Baron's many experiments, with 26 episodes planned, 13 from Hammer and 13 from Columbia. But the two studios had very different ideas. Hammer wanted to continue their own version of The Curse of Frankenstein, while Columbia, which held the TV rights to Universal's monster films, pushed for something closer to the Karloff-style creature. In the end, the partnership fell apart, and only one episode was ever made, The Face in the Tombstone Mirror, directed by Kurt Siodmak, the writer of The Wolfman. It starred Anton Diffring as a very Cushing-like Baron and Don Megawan as the monster, complete with the familiar flat head. The episode is now in the public domain. I've left a link in the description if you'd like to watch it.